William Wilberforce. You may know him as the man who ended the British slave trade. But what you might not know is how his story teaches us one of life's most powerful lessons: perseverance. Today we're going to dive into his journey and explore how his relentless determination can inspire you to stay the course no matter the challenge. Welcome to the Peace Painter channel, where we explore the lives of historical figures who have helped bend the arc of the universe towards peace and well-being, and ponder how we might learn from their examples. Let's set the scene. It's the late 1700s. The British Empire is thriving off the brutal transatlantic slave trade. It's a system that's deeply entrenched politically, socially, and economically. To challenge it is to take on a Goliath, and yet that's exactly what Wilberforce did. Wilberforce wasn't always a champion of justice. Born into wealth in 1759, he lived a life of privilege. He attended St. John's College, Cambridge, where he met William Pitt. Yes, that guy who would go on to become the Prime Minister. It was Pitt who convinced Wilberforce of the idea to seek seats together in Parliament. In 1780, Wilberforce was elected to the House of Commons at the age of 21, while still a student and a party animal. The young member of Parliament quickly became a rising star, impressing even his elder colleagues with his outsized wit, charm, and above all, engaging and persuasive oratory. Yet in these first couple years in office, he still hadn't come into his own. In his mid-20s, however, something changed. In 1784, Wilberforce visited continental Europe with his sister and mother. Isaac Milner, a mathematician and inventor, 30 years Wilberforce's senior, also joined the group as a kind of conversational partner. Milner was also an ordained deacon who introduced Wilberforce to the book The Rise and Progress of Religion in the Soul. The book had a massive impact on Wilberforce, a kind of definitive awakening. He realized he wanted his life to mean more, to do more, and so he took up two causes.
God Almighty has set before me two great objects: the suppression of the slave trade and the reformation of manners.
By the way, by reformation of manners, he was referring to no less than fixing the degraded moral fabric of the culture in Britain at the time. Imported rum from the slave trade and homespun bathtub gin supplied an epidemic of drunkenness and sexual immorality. Gambling, already pervasive vice, became state-sanctioned through lotteries. Sports involving animal cruelty, such as cockfighting, duck baiting, and bull baiting, were prized forms of gambling entertainment. Such blood sports also included bare-knuckle boxing in the pubs, often resulting in brain damage and even death. So think about trying to reverse these cultural vices as your hobby while your day job is abolishing slavery. Easy, right? In 1787, Wilberforce officially joined the fight against the slave trade. With the help of activists like Thomas Clarkson and the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade, he began presenting evidence and making his case in Parliament. Meanwhile, Wilberforce faced debilitating health issues, including ulcerative colitis, which plagued him for most of his life. To manage the pain, he took daily doses of opium, which often left him lethargic and depressed. Adding to his trials, he endured profound personal losses, including the deaths of two daughters, his sister, and several close friends. Yet through it all, he pressed on. And let's not forget, abolishing slavery wasn't Wilberforce's only mission. Remember his hobby of improving society in other ways? He helped found organizations like the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the Church Mission Society, and the National Gallery. He advocated for better working conditions, education for the poor, and even prison reform. In terms of his efforts to abolish slavery, the first 18 years were met with failure. 18 years. Let that sink in. How many of us would keep going after 1 year of rejection, or 5 or 10? Wilberforce faced opposition from politicians, merchants, and even the public, but he didn't give up. Why? Because he believed in the cause, and he believed that perseverance could move mountains. Over time, public opinion did indeed begin to shift. His speeches, the data he presented, and the relentless campaigning of his allies began to chip away at the institution. Finally, in 1807, Parliament passed the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act. This made it illegal to buy and sell slaves across the British Empire, but, and this is a big but, existing slaves were not granted emancipation. So, you guessed it, Wilberforce turned his attention to emancipating those still enslaved. This would take another, wait for it, 26 years. And it wasn't until 1833, just 3 days before his death, at age 73, that Wilberforce learned Parliament had passed the Slavery Abolition Act. Wow. Wilberforce's life shows that perseverance requires resilience, faith, and courage. And although for Wilberforce it was about a consistent focus, it was also about balancing multiple commitments, overcoming personal hardships, and never losing sight of the greater good. So what tips can we learn from Wilberforce's story of perseverance? First, know your why. For changemakers like Wilberforce, this often takes the form of a deep heartache. To Wilberforce, the ideas of his faith were painfully at odds with the heartbreaking realities of slavery and the depraved state of the British moral fabric. Leaving the world a better place on these fronts was where he found deep meaning. Second, know your strengths. Wilberforce was fun-loving and sociable, but his greatest strength was his oratorical skills. One reporter remarked that his speeches are, quote, so distinct and melodious that the most hostile ear hangs on them delighted. Imagine that. His friend William Pitt, no stranger to hearing speeches, held Wilberforce as, quote, the greatest natural eloquence of all the men I ever knew. Third, focus on progress big and small. Every debate, every petition, every ally Wilberforce gained brought him a little closer to his goal. Small victories add up. Fourth, build a supportive network. Wilberforce surrounded himself with friends and allies who shared his vision. In fact, the background to this painting is a shout out to one such friend. John Newton had previously captained a slave ship before his own transformation. He would go on to write Amazing Grace. It was Newton who personally encouraged Wilberforce to remain in politics shortly after Wilberforce's own transformation, when he had reservations about whether his faith could mesh with politics. If you're interested, you can check out this video I did on that story. And finally, recognize that setbacks and even apparent outright failures are part of the journey. This is something that shows up in the lives of all change makers of consequence. Meaningful change is hard. It's fraught with obstacles and by nature creates resistance. In the end, it's the inner faith and internal reward that drives them to succeed in their endeavors, where simple external reward would otherwise be insufficient. In a message to the Anti-Slavery Society, Wilberforce once wrote,
Our motto must continue to be perseverance, and ultimately, I trust the Almighty will crown our efforts with success.
So whether you're working on a personal goal, a career ambition, or a cause you care deeply about, I hope you take to heart these keys from the life of an exemplar of perseverance. What's a goal you're working toward, and how can you apply Wilberforce's lessons to your own journey? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insights from history's great peacemakers.